Snaps are some of the most important closures we use in costuming. They're fast and quiet and easy to attach to garments. So we use them for closing shirts, closing waistbands of skirts, attaching decorative items to things, all kinds of uses. As you can see, there's many different sizes of snaps. There's this, the biggest one is called a Whopper Popper, and then it goes all the way down to these little teeny ones for delicate things. Each snap is comprised of two parts, a ball, which is a sort of sticky out part, and a socket, which has a hole in it. So you always want to make sure that you're sewing the snaps on in the right orientation. It can get confusing. Sometimes people sew the socket portion on upside down because it kind of looks like the ball when it's upside down, but you always want to test your snap, make sure it'll click together, and then you know that that's the orientation that you want to sew it onto your fabric. And if you sew it on upside down, it won't ever snap together. So when we give you something to sew on snaps to, we will most always have markings on it for you to sew on. So I'm going to use these two markings and I'm going to show you how we attach the snaps. When you're sewing on closures like snaps, buttons, hooks, and bars, which you'll see later, you always are going to double your thread, and that just makes it go a little faster and things a little more secure. So you're going to do the same knot that you normally do with your hand sewing stitches, but you're going to do it with both ends of the thread. So you're holding both ends of the thread in a loop. You're going to wrap them around the needle, and you're going to pull it off the end of the needle, and there's your knot. So when you're sewing a snap on, you want it to be pretty neatly done, and you're basically going around the outside of each of the 4 holes that are in the snap. So, and then the back should be fairly neat as well with just small little stitches. So to start your snap, you're going to take just a little stitch right over your dot or marking, and then you're going to come up through the first hole of your snap. I'm going to trim this just so it doesn't get in the way. So once you have your snap attached, you're just going to stitch from the outside around back into that hole. And you're going to do that 4 or 5 times. So once you have one hole sewn 4 times around, you have to get to your next hole, and you don't just want to come up through like that, because this thread, it will be loose and it'll create a weak point in your sewing. So what you're going to do is take a stitch through the stitches you've already done underneath the snap and sort of go in the direction of the new hole and come out that new hole, and that'll hide your stitch underneath the snap. So then you're just going to continue working your way around the snap, stitching through the fabric into the hole, and then you're stitching through that row of stitching, and then you're going to come up through the hole, the next hole. And you should all be able to do this just by looking at the front of your fabric and not sticking your needle in and then having to poke back up from the back. You should just be taking one stitch all the way through the fabric and back up through the hole. And the last one. All right, so then you're going to tie off your thread. You're going to use the same knot you used on your stitches. You're just going to take a little stitch right under your last bit of stitching, and you're going to wrap the end of your thread around your needle and pull up through, and that'll create a knot. You can stitch over it a couple more times just to secure it. And then cut your thread and you are done. So this is the socket portion we just did. So you want to make sure then you do the ball portion, which fits into that snap. So you want to test it and then you're good to go. You know that'll work. So the ball portion of the snap is done the exact same way as the socket portion. You're going to tie off a knot on your thread. Take a stitch over your mark. Come up through the first hole. Oops. And stitch through each hole. And then stitch to the next hole through your stitches, and then coming up. You want to keep your knot thread trimmed. They can get tangled and stuff, so keep it trimmed nicely. And then tying off again. All right, and then once you have them both sewn on, you would just want to test and make sure that they function, and they do, and they snap and pull apart, and that is how you sew on snaps.